Hey guys, it's Thorn. So in my last video, I talked a little bit about some things that I wished witches and Wiccans and pagans in our communities would stop doing. And one of the points on my list was I wished that we would recommend better books, just because Wicca has been popular for decades at this point, really into the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Other forms of witchcraft have followed suit pretty readily. Pagans are everywhere at this point, and yet we're still, by and large, recommending books that were written in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. Hi, there's my Oliver. Particularly, Guide for the Solitary Practitioner. We're recommending a lot of, well, actually, you know what? I really don't see Silver Ravenwolf's books recommended so much anymore, I think, just because of the kind of anti-silver campaign that sort of happened, particularly in the early 2000s. He latched on. He's not going anywhere, guys. Okay. And some of the things I said were that, Oliver. Sorry, I can't talk with him just like on me like that. Anyway, one of the things I said was that some of the problems with these books were that they were still kind of teaching history that was wrong, or just kind of the way that they emphasized particular things just were no longer applicable. And I want to make it clear that I still love those books. This is not an anti-Scott Cunningham video. I came up practicing eclectic Wicca in the 90s, like a lot of us. So many of those books and those authors will always have a place in my heart. But it's been years and years and years, and there's so much material now. There are some really, really great books out there, but they get lost in the mix, either because we're still recommending Scott Cunningham, or we are really interested in some of these like pretty Instagram-worthy hardcovers that have popped up in the last 5 or 6 years, which, while pretty and suited to hashtags for sure, often are really insubstantial. I've read most of those books. I won't name any by name. I think we're all pretty clear on what I'm talking about. But like, they're just not very good. Like, they're like, from practically any perspective you could take, whether like as a writer or as a witch, as a serious religious person, like, they're just not very substantial, or else some of them are just outright questionable. Anyway, so in response to that video, now that I've talked to you for 3 minutes, in response to that video, I got the obvious request, which was, well, what should we be reading? And it's been a fun exercise for me to go back through my collection and think about books for absolute beginners, because it's been a really long time since I've just read beginner books for the sake of evaluating like how likely I'd be to recommend them, I guess. I've done a lot of reading of beginner books for scholarly work or to kind of examine themes in the movement. I haven't really read many like as a practitioner, and I definitely put on a different hat when I'm doing that. So it was really fun getting to go through the collection and figure out which of those I would give to somebody who was brand new. And this is what I've come up with. So hold tight. I'm not going to go into a super duper amount of depth, just because I don't want to hit you with a 20-minute video. But as Oliver eats my cereal, yes, you're naughty. Naughty cat. But just to give you some ideas. And as with all books, none of these are perfect, right? There's stuff about each of them that I'm kind of like, well, I would have done it this way, or I'm not sure this section is complete, or something. And to be fair, I mean, I'd say that about my own book at this point. So this isn't like me thinking that I'm perfect. But the little pile that I put together represents a few different kinds of Wicca and witchcraft, and I've also got a book here that I picked just kind of generally for paganism. So without further ado, here. So as far as intro to Wicca books, I came up with 3, and I chose these books for slightly different reasons. The first one is Wicca for Beginners by Taya Sabin, and I'm sure the video is flipped, okay? And I'm also not sure I'm pronouncing her name right. It's a Llewellyn book. It came out in 2006, and it's flat out intro book, okay? And the reason it's on my list, and now Oliver, if you can hear him, is screaming from the upstairs. The reason I picked this book is because it goes over a lot of those really foundational things that people like Cunningham are celebrated for, but it does so in more depth without the bad history. Obviously there's some reference to kind of these older sort of myths we have about witches, but overwhelmingly this works to be a comprehensive introduction, and I think she does a pretty good job. There still is this idea that Wicca is linked to shamanism. She's a little bit more critical than Cunningham is, but it's still there. I kind of wish we could drop that stuff altogether, but what have you, that might just be a pipe dream. But I love that chapter 2 is about ethics and kind of basic religious principles. Chapter 2 in a lot of the books that I've been reading recently from like Running Press and some of these British presses and whatever, these newbie kind of books. Chapter 2 is like how to cast spells and how to set up your altar for Halloween and stuff that just is really frivolous in the grand scheme of the tradition. So I appreciate that she kind of gets into stuff that's meaty. I really like the exercises that she has in this book. Things are pretty straightforward. Like I said, there are definitely flaws and holes, as with all books, but I think that this is a better intro today than many of the books that we're citing from the 80s and 90s. I would recommend this book over, for a rote beginner, I would recommend this over Buckland. I'd recommend this over Cunningham. And some of the books that we kind of reach for. I think this one is a better choice. I think it's more relevant for people today. Okay, second book. This is an old favorite, and I confess that I haven't read it in several years, but I remember very distinctly the impression it made on me as a young adult. This was published in 1996, so still later than Cunningham, kind of in that same era, so it definitely has its issues. But I love the very serious perspective that it takes, and that is Wicca by Vivian Crowley. I'll say too, and I'm going to see if I can reach for it without knocking over my little microphone here. Wait, hang on. Never mind, I'm wrong. I'm not reaching for anything. Shh, pretend I didn't say that. So one of my witch friends, this is his favorite intro book, and one of the things that he really loves about it, I'll just kind of attach, is that she talks very specifically about kind of conceptions of Wiccan deities and theology, and she made it clear to him as a new witch that that atheism basically was a thing that worked in Wicca, that it wasn't necessarily about literal belief in gods, which was, that was an interesting point to be making in the 90s. There are a lot of traditionalists who've known that for years, but I think in eclectic Wiccan communities that was kind of like, oh, this novel idea. But anyway, she has this very serious, more academic tone, and something that my friend Corvus has bemoaned to me several times, and she's kind of helped me with as I've been writing my own books, is that there's this thing we do with new books where we assume that just because somebody's a beginner, they must also be like some kind of idiot or simpleton, where they talk down to you. And Crowley doesn't do that. Like, presumably, if you're interested in conversion, you're interested in approaching religion seriously, like you're a reasonable person who's capable of processing complex ideas and being smart about them. And a lot of intro books don't treat us that way. They use colorful euphemisms and pretty pictures, and I've gotten sick of being treated basically like I'm new to reading or something just because I'm new to a subject. And that's something that seems to be really unique about like Wiccan and witchcraft books. Like, because I'm a beginner, I must also be some kind of like illiterate, I guess. And I really like that she doesn't do that. So if you're ready to engage with something that's a little bit more complex, if you kind of share that sentiment with me, this is a really good place to start. It's been reprinted a few times. I think it's even appeared under different titles. But this is still one that's pretty easy to get a hold of. So, yay. Finally, in my Wiccan category, I have Phyllis Curot's Witchcrafting. This is another one of those books that I read when I was probably early on in college, and it really made an impression on me too. I read it again maybe 3 years ago. This one was printed in 2001. And same with Vivian Crowley in the sense that it approaches things with more depth than I think we're accustomed to seeing in intro books. But this book is a lot more poetic, I think. There are rituals and there are activities. One of the things that I love about Phyllis Curot is that all of her books are kind of like autobiographies, aside from the one that's actually her autobiography. Oliver is going to jump up on me here in a second. Oh, hello. So you get this additional insight into her life as a priestess, which I think is really valuable for newcomers. So this book is really lovely. She's also got a whole chapter on the god, which I appreciate because when does he ever get the props that he deserves? And she still covers a lot of the stuff that's fun, right? Like divination and spell casting and that sort of thing. But it's just a serious-minded book that, I don't know, it has a lot to offer, and it's still very approachable. So that's a really great one. Let's see. So this one I just read. It just came out. This one is on the traditional witchcraft end of the spectrum, and this is Besom, Stang, and Sword by Christopher Orpello and Tara Love McGuire, who are both awesome. I was on their podcast like 2 months ago. Anyway, they are awesome, and this is their first book, and it's really, really great. Again, as with all beginner books, there's always stuff that you're like, oh man, like, I wish I had more information about this, right? Or I wish they'd talked about this. But this is a great intro to traditional witchcraft, and one of the reasons I love it so much is because traditional witches, like, how Gardnerians were really good at being assholes in like the 80s? Traditional witches are kind of like the assholes of today in my mind. Like, you can't go anywhere without getting some sort of like woo-splained like piece of wisdom about how like your witchcraft isn't real because like whatever, I don't know. And they don't do any of that. It's very approachable. They're not assholes about other types of witchcraft. And there's lots of practical stuff that you can actually do and try. And it's grounded in a lot of those classics that traditional witches often cite, like Paul Hewson, Right Mastering Witchcraft, Peter Padden, Doreen Valiente, Michael Howard. So like he's still citing a lot of those books, but he's doing it in a way that's really approachable and, dare I say, friendly. So if you're interested in getting into, I say he, it's both of them, right? If you're interested in pursuing a traditional witchcraft path, this is a really good place to start. Yes, so there we go. 2 last ones. Think of them as like bonus books. So a lot of people get interested in witchcraft because they're interested in acquiring magical power, which I totally relate to. I think we've all been there. But the thing is you don't need this level of religiosity in order to just practice magic. And I think people don't realize that. They think like, oh, well, I'm interested in casting spells, therefore I must be a Wiccan. Like, nope, those are different things. So why not just read about magical power? Because you could just do that. This is Deborah Lipp's Magical Power for Beginners. It's on the For Beginners series put out by Llewellyn. This is actually a really good series. I've read 5 or 6 books in it, and this one is great. I love Deborah Lipp. She's amazing. She is, excuse me, she's a Gardnerian witch, but this is not written from a Wiccan perspective. It's not really written from a religious perspective at all. Fundamentally, it tackles this idea of like, what the hell is energy? And when people talk about raising power, what does that mean? And how do you do something effective with it? So again, she's got lots of really great exercises, meditations, etc. So if you're just interested in like being magical, this is an awesome book. So check this one out. Yeah, Deborah Lipp is awesome. Her books on Wicca are awesome, but this one takes a different angle that is just really awesome and I think really necessary. And I'm saying awesome a whole lot, but that's okay. You guys will live, right? Last book. This one is just generally paganism broadly. Its author has a background in Druidry. He writes for Pathos, and some of you may already know who I'm talking about. This is The Path of Paganism by John Beckett. This book came out, I think, 2 years ago. And intro book, this is for someone who is interested in the path broadly, but maybe hasn't like chosen a camp. And what I love about it is it asks you a lot of critical questions and asks you to think really deeply about what you're doing. The overview is great, really approachable, but again, like John Beckett doesn't write at you like you're a moron, which I always appreciate. So if you're just interested in paganism broadly, maybe you haven't set down stakes anywhere, or maybe you're just interested in something that's a little bit more foundational, this book is really awesome. I recommend it highly. So there you go. All right, guys. I hope you are well. There are some books. I'm sure I'll think of others while I upload this one. But yeah, hope you guys are good. If I could stop the video, that'd be great. Okay, here we go.